Okay, so let us just recall. We had started looking at the notion of integration, and we defined what is called upper sums and lower sums with respect to a partition P. And we said f is integrable if there is a sequence of refinement partitions Pn such that the upper sums with respect to that sequence and the lower sums with respect to that sequence both converge to the same limit. And that was called the integral of the function. So that was called the notion of integral for the function. We'll start looking at another notion, another way of looking at this integral. If you recall, for the upper sum, we looked at the maximum value of the function in that sub-interval. That was the height. And for the lower sum, we looked at the minimum value of the function in that sub-interval. There was a significant improvement over that, which was suggested by Riemann. It said that instead of looking at the upper and the lower, supposing f is a function given in an interval a b and p is a partition, what you do is you select any point in the sub-interval ik, right? In every sub-interval, pick up a random point whichever you like and look at the height at that point. So take a rectangle with that arbitrary height, ck is, so choose any point ck in the interval xk minus 1 to xk. So with that height and so this is xk minus 1, look at the area of that rectangle and add it up. So that gives you a sum, right? And this sum obviously lies between the upper and the lower because you are just looking at the value at a point. Look at the length of the interval, xk minus 1, okay, and the value of the function. So this is what we are doing. So this is the partition, okay. In each, pick up any random point, whichever you like, look at that height, look at that rectangle, add up the areas of these rectangles, and that sum will again approximate the area below the curve, and that is given the name SPF. So that is called the Riemann sum with respect to the partition. So that sum is called the Riemann sum. With respect to the so it depends not only on the partition, but also your choice of points in that sub-interval, right? I may choose one point, you may choose some other point in the same sub-interval. So the sum depends upon the partition as well as the points. But supposing whatever you do, whichever points you choose, this SPF is between the upper and the lower one. That is clear, right? So if the function is going to be integrable, that means the upper and the lower are going to come closer and closer to the same value, then you expect that SPF also should go to the same value, namely that should be the integral. So that is what Riemann thought, and he was able to prove. He said a function is said to be integrable if the sums SPF converge to a limit, right? Whatever you choose, CKs, whatever partitions you choose, as you add more and more points, as you make the norm of the partition smaller and smaller, if these SPFs converge to a value, then you say that function is integrable, and that will be same as the limit of the upper and the lower sum, right? So theorem by Riemann said that a function is integrable if and only if there is a sequence Pn of refinement partitions, of course, such that the norm of that goes to 0 and the limit Spnf exists, and that is nothing but the integral of the function, right? But what is the advantage, what is the significant difference between this and the upper sum and the lower sums? See, to define upper sum and lower sum, you have to put a condition. First of all, the function should be bounded, right? Then only you can take the maximum height and the minimum height. While in Riemann sums, you don't have to put that condition at all to define the Riemann sums. You are given a function in the interval AB, you take a partition, pick up any point ck in the interval ik, and look at the height f of ck, multiply by the length of the sub-interval xk minus 1, add it up, you have the Riemann sum. So to define Riemann sums, you don't need a function to be bounded. But it says if a function is integrable, if all this converge to a limit, then automatically it will happen, one can prove that function actually is bounded. So that comes out as a consequence. But he was able to show that, for example, he was able to show that a function which is not necessarily continuous, which has finite number of discontinuities, that also is integrable by this definition, which is not possible to show by upper sums and lower sums. And the second advantage of this way is that integral becomes a limit now. integral becomes a limit of something. And limit has nice properties, that limit is additive, right? It is a linear operation. So as a consequence, you will get your integration is a linear operation. Integral of f plus g is integral of f plus integral of g. So that comes out nicely as a consequence of this. So that is the integral. But let us look at the example to show that how this definition works. So let us look at the function fx is equal to x square in the interval a to b. So what I want to do, I want to construct a sequence of refinement partitions, right? And look at the Riemann sums SPF and show that they converge to something. And that will be the integral of the function x square over the interval a to b. So we know the method of constructing refinement partitions. Divide the interval into 2n equal parts. So let us take that. This is a continuous function, so it is integrable anyway. So look at, because it is integrable, okay, so I can take actually any, equal partition also if I like, because Riemann condition says that the norm of the partition should go to 0. That is another advantage. For upper sums and lower sums to converge, I have to make it a monotonically decreasing and increasing. In the Riemann thing, I don't have to make it increasing or decreasing, right? So I can take this equal partition b minus a by n and then look at the norm of this goes to 0. That satisfies the condition for the Riemann theorem. And let us look at, choose the point ck is an arbitrary point, right? So let us, for my convenience, I will choose the point ck to be xk, the right end point. Okay. Then what is SPF? That is same as UPF, right? Upper sum, because the function y equal to x square, right? So let us write delta n to be the length of each subinterval b minus a by n, and let us calculate SPF with respect to this equal partition. So it will be xk square f at ck into the length of the subinterval. Okay. Now we'll just simplify. This length for each one of them is same, so that comes out, and xk square is nothing but a plus k times the length of the subinterval, right? What is the point xk? From a, you go on adding those many. So a plus k times delta n whole square. Now open it out using your square formula and now try to simplify that. So this is all simplification inside that thing. And then use your formulas, sum of first natural numbers, first of squares of natural numbers, first and, right? Squares of first and natural numbers, what is the sum? So those formulas you use and simplify, and it comes out to be this. So that is delta n, that is b minus a by n. So simplify. And you further simplify that, you want to take the limit of this. So limit as n goes to infinity, right? So that gives you a square into b minus a, and this goes to 1, and this goes to 1 again. 2, it goes to 2 actually, so 2 by 6 will give you 3. So once you simplify that, so this, I think you should sit down and work out yourself. This is arithmetic, so it comes out this, and which you simplify, simply comes out b cube minus a cube by 3. So but what we are saying is that Riemann sum, which in this case is upper sum, because we have selected ck to be appropriate. It's my choice, right? I can choose any ck. So let me choose ck to be the right or left, whichever you like, doesn't matter. And simplify and take the limit, use your properties of sequences, what is the limit of sequences and so on. And finally it comes out to be b cube minus a cube by 3. So this is computing the integral by definition, using the notion of partitions, writing the sums and taking the limits. So that is, now because this is a limit, so we have those usual properties of about addition and scalar multiplication for integrals. First of all, if f is non-negative, then what is the integral? It is the limit of the Riemann sums. And what is Riemann sum? Value of the function at a point into the length of the interval. And if the function is non-negative, that each term in that sum is going to be non-negative. So limit is going to be non-negative. So this integral is going to be a non-negative quantity. So if f is non-negative, the integral is non-negative, right? It follows from the property of sequences that if an, right, is a non-negative sequence, then the limit will be also non-negative. So from that property. And this is not difficult to show actually, that, by the way, remember that integral a to b fx dx, now intuitively we started with the idea of the area below the graph of the function, right? I implicitly took the graph to be above the x-axis, right? I took the function to be non-negative. But supposing the function becomes negative at some point in the interval, right? So integral could be a negative quantity, Because supposing the function is always negative, right? Then f of ck is negative, the length of the interval is positive, so product will be negative. So limit will be a non-positive quantity. It could be negative, it could be 0. So in general, the integral could be positive, negative, or 0. Only if it is above the x-axis that you can say it represents the area below the graph of the function. Otherwise, you can say the integral represents the signed area with the appropriate sign. Okay? So, and this property says that whether it is positive or negative, if you take the absolute value of the integral, it is always less than or equal to integral of the absolute value, but that is a non-negative quantity. K times property of the limit, k times a n limit is equal to k times the limit of a n's. So by that property, this follows. And limit of the sum is equal to sum of the limits. The same property is transmitted here for the property of integrals. And finally, if f is bigger than g, then integral f is bigger than integral g. That again follows, because if f is bigger than g, then f minus g is bigger than or equal to 0. And we have already seen integral of f minus g will be bigger than or equal to 0, but integral of f minus g is equal to integral f minus integral g by the previous property. So integral f will be bigger than or equal to integral g. So all these properties follows because of the property of Riemann saying that you can treat your integral as a limit of something, and limit has those nice properties. So using that, all these properties follow. This is a property which is slightly maybe technical to prove, that if a function is integrable in AB and C is a point in between, then it is also integrable in every subinterval inside AB. Right? And one can show that integral a to b is same as integral a to c plus integral c to b. So this is called additive over the range of integration. Okay? So essentially the idea is, if you have a partition of the big interval, right, and there is a point c in between, from that you can construct a partition of a to c and a partition of c to b. But the point c may not be in the partition, but you can always throw in extra point c, because then we will be refining the partition better. So that doesn't affect the condition that Pn, norm of Pn goes to 0. So that is the basic idea in that. Okay. So additive, and a to a we normally define it to be equal to 0 by convention. So these are the additive properties, linearity properties of the function, that the integration is a non-negative operation. Integral of a non-negative function is non-negative, right? You take a function, integrate, you get a number. Right? So it is an operator which operates on the class of functions and gives you some real number. So this operator is non-negative. If f is non-negative, then value is non-negative. It is linear. Integral of f plus minus g is equal to integral of f plus minus integral of g. If you take a scalar multiple of f, then it comes out. That is what is called linearity property of the integration. And one more property, namely absolute value of the integral is less than or equal to integral of the absolute value. So those are more or less obvious and trivial properties. Here is another simple property, what is called mean value property for integrals, which is very useful and which is intuitively also not very clear, but it is very nice. So supposing f is a function on an interval ab to r, and it is a continuous function. So now here we are assuming, we are not saying that just f is integrable, we are saying actually it is a continuous function. Then it says that there is a point c inside the interval ab, say that the integral a to b fx dx is equal to f of c times b minus a. So let us just try to understand. Left hand side intuitively is the area bounded by the graph of the function. It says this area is equal to area of a particular rectangle on the whole interval b minus a. There is a point c where if I take this height, then the area of this rectangle is the area of the graph below the area below the graph of the function, right? There is a value in between. There exists at least one point. It only says there exists. You may not be able to find that point. Many theorems in mathematics are only existence theorems, which say that something happens, but where that thing happens, you may not be able to pinpoint always. Even the simplest example, you have an intermediate value property where a function takes positive values and negative values, and somewhere in between it must take the value 0. But supposing it is even a polynomial of degree 6, you may not be able to find a root for that, right? So that's where the approximations come into picture. There is something called the Newton method of finding approximate 0 of a function, right? That comes as part of a numerical analysis. So there are many theorems which are existential, and for which one has to find some approximate methods of that phenomena happening. So here once again there is an existence theorem which says that integral of a to b fx dx for a continuous function f is equal to area of a rectangle with a height at some point c in between. Right? And the proof is quite simple for this. See, let me divide by this b minus a. Let me write it as 1 over b minus a times integral a to b fx dx. I want to say it is equal to value of the function at some point. I am just rewriting the claim which I want to prove. Look at the left hand side, divide by b minus a. So what I want to prove? 1 over b minus a into this integral is equal to the value of the function at that point. Now I want to, so what is the claim I want to prove? That the function f takes a particular value at a point c. That is what I want to prove. And that value is 1 over b times this integral. Now what theorem I should be using? Immediately to my mind comes intermediate value property, that I should try to say that 1 over b minus a into this integral is a value somewhere in the range of the function, somewhere below and somewhere above, right? And what could be a value? If I want to approximate the integral, what is the smallest value of the integral? F is continuous. So on the closed bounded interval, so here I am going to use the property f is continuous. It is on a closed bounded interval, so it is bounded. So there is an infimum, smallest value, small m. There is a largest value, capital M. So this integral is going to be between small m times b minus a and less than or equal to capital M times b minus a. So if I divide by 1 over b minus a, the m divided by b minus a is less than or equal to 1 over b minus a. This integral is less than or equal to capital M, right? And those values are taken. Okay, small m and capital M are taken because f is a continuous function. It attains its maxima and minima. So that value is in between two values which are taken by the function, so that value must be taken by intermediate value property. So that is the proof of the theorem. So it's a very logical way of thinking about what should be the proof. You want to show at some point f of c a value is taken. So somehow you have to apply intermediate value property. And continuity, that should give a hint how to apply. So let me show you the proof. So let us write small m to be the infimum of the function, capital M to be the supremum or maximum of the function in the interval a b. These two numbers exist and they are taken at some point in the interval a b by the property of continuous function. Small m is equal to f at some point, right, in the interval, and capital M also is taken. Maxima, minima are attained for a continuous function. That is important. So small m is less than or equal to 1 over b minus a, less than or equal to this, less than or equal to capital M, right? Because m times b minus a is less than or equal to integral is less than or equal to capital M times b minus a. So this small m is taken somewhere, capital M is taken somewhere, this is the value in between, this must be attained somewhere. So that is what is called the intermediate value property, that there is a point C such that f of c is equal to this. Right? So that completes the proof of the intermediate value property. But very crucially, we have used in this theorem, intermediate value property, for the mean value property for the integral, the notion that f is a continuous function on closed bounded interval. That has been heavily used, right? Because f is continuous, it is bounded, and maxima, minima are attained at some points. So one can ask whether if you drop that condition, will this be true or not? And there is an example to indicate, you can have very simple examples to indicate that condition of continuity in this cannot be, oh, okay, there is something else which has come. Okay, my train of thought goes somewhere else, but I have written, okay. Let us just look at this number, which we are saying is actually equal to f of c. I can treat this number as average value of the function f. Why should I treat it as average value? Because supposing you are given three numbers, right? A, B and C. How do you find the average? A plus B plus C divided by 3. You take the total of those quantities and divide by the number of those quantities. Now but here total f is a function which is taking value fx, right? So I have to add up the values of fx. And they are not only infinite, something much more than infinite, right? Fx, x belonging to AB. How do I add up these numbers? So integration is a way of adding these numbers. So this is the sum of those values. How many values are there? As much as the length of the interval. So interpreted that way, this number is called the average value of the function over the interval AB. Okay? I am justifying why average value is something this. And the theorem says for a continuous function, the average is attained. Look at three numbers. The average may not be one of the numbers. Because when you are taking the numbers, that function is never going to be a continuous function because of discrete kind of values. Right? But for a continuous function, it says the average is attained at a point. That is the important thing. Okay? So this average is attained at a point. So let us say that now the continuity is not required. So here is an example for that. Put f of x equal to 0 in minus 1 to 0 and 1 in 0 to 1. Right? Then what is the integral of the function? In this it is 0, it is 1, so integral is 1. So average value of the function is half. Right? Length of the interval is 2, and at no point it takes the value half. It takes either only the value 0 and 1 because this function is not continuous, so we don't expect it to take anyway. So the continuity criteria is essential for the average value to be taken at a point. It cannot be dropped. Now, we said that a function is integrable. If you want to compute its integral, either you have to look at the Riemann sums and take the limit, or you have to look at the upper sums and the lower sums and then take the limit. Common value will be the integral. So a condition for a function to be integrable was upper sums minus the lower sums, right, with respect to pn's. That difference goes to 0. Now supposing there is a number which is trapped in between upper sums and lower sums. Whatever partition you take, you are able to get hold of a number, say alpha, which has the property that it always lies between an upper sum and the lower sum. And if a function is integrable, what should be that alpha? There is nothing else possibility other than that number has to be equal to the integral, because the upper sums can be made smaller, lower one can be made smaller, and if a function is integrable, that difference can be made as small as you want, and this poor chap alpha is in between, it is trapped. So it has to be equal to the integral. So this gives us a method of finding integrals. Somehow you are able to guess a number which is in between upper and lower for every partition, then that must be the integral. So that is what this proposition says. F is a function which is integrable. We already given it to be integrable function. Only problem is how to find that integral. So suppose there is a number a which lies between upper and the lower thing for every partition p. Then that number a must be equal to the integral of the function a to b. And the proof is straightforward, because if it is integrable, the difference will go to, right? Both are converging to same thing. So a must be equal to the integral. So that is the proof. So this difference goes to 0. So a between this implies that must be equal to a. So proof is a straightforward application of the criteria that the upper and lower for integrability goes to the same limit, and if something in between. And this is very useful in proving what is called fundamental theorem of calculus. So we are going to prove a theorem which is very important in calculus, and many people say integration is the reverse of differentiation. Why? The culprit or the credit should go to what is called fundamental theorem of calculus, because it is a fundamental theorem because it relates differentiation with integration. That's why it is called fundamental theorem of calculus. And it also gives a way of computing integrals. For certain class of functions, it says this is the algorithm for computing the integral without going to the definition. And the theorem is as follows. It says, suppose you got two functions, small f and capital F, defined on the same interval AB, closed and bounded interval, with the properties f is integrable. I want to compute the integral of f, small f, but I am given that the capital F is continuous on the interval a to b, and the derivative of capital F on the open interval AB is same as the function small f. So I want to compute the integral of small f, but I am able to locate a function capital F which is continuous on the closed bounded interval AB and is differentiable in the open interval AB with derivative as that function. So what I am saying is I am able to locate a function whose derivative is the integrand in the open interval AB. Then the claim says then the integral of f is just fb minus f of a. Right? It bypasses everything. If you are able to locate a function capital F whose derivative in the open interval AB is equal to small f, and that function is continuous, then Integral is just take the values at the endpoints, forget everything else. And that is the beauty of this theorem, right? It simplifies the notion of how to compute an integral for an integrable function, because f is already given to be integrable. And in that sense, because capital F is derivative of small f, so you feel that differentiation and integration are, you integrate the derivative. What is small f? That is the derivative of capital F. Small f is the derivative. So integrate the derivative, you get back the function. That is what it's saying. So in that sense, integration is the process which is the reverse of differentiation. So let us prove this theorem, right? And the proof, how should the proof go? You want to relate small f with capital F, right? What is the relation between small m and capital F? Derivative of capital F is small f. So you want to relate f with its derivative, right? You want to relate a function f with its derivative. And what is the theorem which relates the two? The only theorem that I know of is Lagrange's mean value theorem. It relates fb minus f of a with the derivative at some point. So somehow we have to use Lagrange's mean value theorem, right? And it is over a interval. So an integral involves partition. So let us take a partition of, so I am going to compute the left hand side over a partition and somehow use Lagrange's mean value theorem and end up with this answer. That is how my strategy is going to be for working out a proof, right? So let us start with a partition of the interval, okay? This is a partition, a, x0, x1, x2, xn, and look at the subinterval. What is fb minus f of a? That is the right hand side I want to compute, right? What is f of b minus f of a? B is equal to xn, a is equal to x0, so that is f of xn minus x0, right? Now what I will do is, there is no till now partition has not entered into picture. I will introduce a partition in between. What I will do is, I will add and subtract each point, value at each point, and write it as, so write it as sum of f of xk minus f of xk minus 1, k equal to 1 to n. Add and subtract the in between terms, right? Now, f of xk minus f of xk minus 1, now I will try to relate this quantity with the derivative, okay? So in this interval, apply mean value theorem in the interval xk minus 1 to xk. The function capital F is continuous over the interval xk minus 1 to xk. It is differentiable in the open interval. Lagrange's mean value theorem is applicable. So there is a point ck in between this open interval, so that f of xk minus f of xk minus 1, this is equal to the derivative, which is small f, into the length of the interval. So you can see already that term of the sum is appearing. So that gives you that this must be equal to this. Capital F is small f. So that gives you that f of xk minus f of xk minus 1, this value is small fk. And now if I sum it both sides, you can see now that Riemann sum appearing. So from 1 and 2, that 1 was the earlier thing. So fb minus f of a, which was written as summation of this quantity, summation of this, that is equal to summation f of ck minus this. Is that okay? What we have done is, we have just taken the partition of the interval AB, fb minus f of a, we have written as a telescopic sum with respect to the partition points. In each sub-interval, we have applied Lagrange's mean value theorem and we have gotten this sum. And this is the Riemann sum, right? Now look at, so this is the Riemann sum, and this always lies between the lower sum and the upper sum, right? F of ck, smallest value will give you the lower sum in that interval, largest value will give the upper sum. So this sum always lies between lower sum and upper sum, right? So what are we getting? And this quantity is equal to fb minus f of a. So upper sum, lower sum is less than or equal to fb minus f of a, is less than or equal to upper sum. So I got a number fb minus f of a, which is trapped between the lower sum and the upper sum for any partition, whatever the partition P may be. That means that number must be equal to the integral, and that completes the proof that the number must be equal to integral. So fb minus f of a is equal to that, right? So that is what is called first part of fundamental theorem of calculus. So it says, if f is a function which is integrable and it is the derivative of a function capital F, right, in the open interval AB, and capital F is continuous in the closed bounded interval AB, then integral of f is equal to this. So that is a beautiful theorem. It bypasses many things. So now That's why in your school, or I was foxed when the first time I learned differentiation. I learned differentiation in BSc first year. That time it was very much, progress was not reached that fast to school actually. And like any other average student, I was just floored. As soon as differentiation was over, I was asked to memorize 200 formulas for integration. Right? I never knew fundamental theorem of calculus because it was not taught at BSc level at that time. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. You are clapping. Okay. The commercial break is over. The commercial break is over. No more clapping. Okay. I said, I think you should understand a student of mathematics logic saying it is over. Okay, after that clapping should not come, even for that statement. Okay, if you are saying it's open interval, endpoints are not included. I think still my message has not gone through. Anyway, so you have those formulas, derivative. Okay, let's get back to derivative of xn is equal to this. So integral of this is equal to this. So whenever you are able to recognize a derivative, yes, let us come back. So whenever you are able to recognize derivative, and derivative is continuous, that is important, that is forgotten. One normally says this is derivative, so integral of that is that. This is derivative, this is integral of that. But you have to always put in mind that derivative should be a continuous function. Only over that portion you can say integral is equal to that thing. Okay. So this is integral a to b is equal to this, and so on. So let me not spend time over these things. Derivative of exponential is exponential. So those are the integrals. So the important thing, fundamental theorem of calculus part 1 says, important thing is to recognize for a function small f, a function capital F whose derivative is small f. That is an important quantity, right? What name we should give to that quantity? So a name is given that is called the indefinite integral of the function, okay, or antiderivative for the function. So let us call it antiderivative for the time being. So a function, because it relates derivative of f is small f, right? So we say it is an antiderivative for function small f. Now you can say we only want f dash to be equal to small f, and two functions, even if they differ by a constant, derivative is not going to change. So antiderivative for a function need not be unique. Any two antiderivatives will differ by a constant, consequence of Lagrange's mean value theorem. So this examples for x square, this is the antiderivative and so on. Okay. So I have written many examples. Okay. So let us come back to any two antiderivatives differ by a constant. Okay. So for a given a function small f, it has many antiderivatives, right? We want to collect them together in one box. So we look at a set, right? Given a function, look at the set of all possible antiderivatives for that function small f. That is a set where any two functions will differ by a constant. Okay. So that set is denoted by, without putting any limits, this sign fx dx is called indefinite integral of the function. It is a set. Okay. It is a set of collection of all possible antiderivatives for the function small f. Okay. Now any two of them are going to differ by a constant. So one writes that this set, loosely one writes this set is equal to f of x plus c. This is only a way of writing. Okay. And this is also nice because once you put the limits, it gives you fb minus f of a. Okay. So this is only a way of writing what is called the indefinite integral, because I think in school normally you are just asked to write it as a number, but that is not a number, it is only a representation. So let us not go into, right. Now the important question comes, I said you write the set of all possible antiderivatives as a set, right, for a given function f. Now the question comes, does it have at least one element inside it? Given a small function f on an interval a b, is there at least one antiderivative for it? Does it exist? Right? If it does not exist, then no question of finding it, right? Locating 1. And if you can't locate 1, then you can't integrate the function. So it is important to know what is the class of functions for which at least antiderivatives exist. And that is called Fundamental Theorem of Calculus Part 2, which says this is the class of functions for which you can find an antiderivative. At least one exists. Okay? And any two will differ. And that class is that of continuous function. So suppose f is a continuous function, then it says look at the function a to x ft dt x belonging to ab. So that is the function capital F. This function is defined for every value of x because small f being continuous on closed bounded interval ab is integrable on interval ab. So it is also integrable on every subinterval of ab. So it is integrable on the interval a to x for every x. So this function capital F is defined, and it says its derivative is nothing but small f on all points in the interval ab. Right? So let us prove. We want to prove the function is differentiable. Capital F is differentiable and derivative is equal to small f. What's the way of proving it is differentiable? You have to look at f of a plus h minus, or f of c plus h minus f of c divided by h, limit h going to 0, definition, right? Nothing else. So let us compute. Oh, okay. Let me forget about visualizations. I'll come back, okay? I'll give you your quota of visualizations. So let us look at f. Capital F is this. So at any point inside the interval x in AB, let us look at h not equal to 0. Let us look at f of x plus h minus f of x divided by h. Limit of that h goes to 0 should be the derivative. But what is that equal to? 1 over h. What is f of x plus h? That is integral from a to x plus h. F of x is integral a to x. So now use the properties of the integral, right? This integral is a to x plus integral x to x plus h. One integral cancels. So what is this equal to? It is just equal to 1 over h integral x to x plus h f of t. And now what I want to take limit of this as h goes to 0, right? Quite often than not, you will find if this is a question asked, then you will apply what is called L'Hopital's rule straight away. But that comes out as a consequence of this later on actually. There is something involved. So one should not be going, we don't want to use L'Hopital rule here at all. Okay? We want to show straight away by definition that this actually exists, limit h going to 0 exists and is equal to the value of the function small f at the point x. Now here I am going to use, see what is going to happen, the h is going to go to 0. So this interval x to x plus h is going to become smaller and smaller, right? And I want to write f at some point in between so that that interval is gone. So I use the mean value theorem for integrals. Use mean value theorem for integrals in the interval x to x plus h. So there is a point in the interval x to x plus h, a point call it c, so that this integral is equal to f of c into the length of the interval. So this is equal to, okay, there is a point in between. So 1 over h, this integral is equal to f of c. Okay, so this is equal to f of c. Keep in mind c is a point between x and x plus h. Now I want to let h go to 0. If h goes to 0, what happens to x plus h? That goes to x. C is in between. So, and f is a continuous function. So what happens to f of c? That goes to f of x. So as h goes to 0, limit of this is equal to limit h going to 0 of f of c, but c is between x and x plus h. H is going to 0, f is a continuous function, so that will go to f of c. Okay, f of x, sorry. Because x is fixed, x plus h is shrinking, right? And c is in between. So c is going to x as h goes to 0. So by continuity, this is equal to f of c, right? This is f of c, so take the limit, and that goes to f of x, so that gives you that f dash must be equal to f of x. So it is straightforward application of mean value theorem for integrals, because x to x plus h, right, is given by f of at some point c into the length of the interval. So the integral is gone, and it comes out in terms of the function small f. So that is what is called fundamental theorem of calculus part. Actually, you can use this to prove also that f is differentiable at the left hand point and the right hand point. Same argument. At the A, you will be only taking the right hand point, right? Coming from the right, at B coming from the left. You can do that to prove. So let me put some remarks that though this theorem says that for a function small f which is continuous, antiderivative exists, and it gives a method of finding antiderivative. What is that antiderivative? It says you integrate a to x. But if you are able to integrate, then what's the use of fundamental theorem of calculus? What's the use of finding antiderivative at all? We want to locate an antiderivative because it helps us to compute the integral. So this theorem has only existential value, right? It says every continuous function has an antiderivative. That class is non-empty, that set is non-empty collection of all antiderivatives. If you are lucky, given a function, if you are lucky to locate somehow, right, by some other considerations without doing anything else, an antiderivative, then you can compute its integral very easily. That is the advantage of this, right? It assures you, you have verified your function is continuous, right? It says you can integrate now if you are able to locate an antiderivative for this. That is the advantage of this theorem, right? So for continuous functions, it is not difficult to integrate. Good. So let me just summarize what we have done till now. We looked at why we should consider integration, how we should define the notion of integral by upper sums and lower sums. Then we looked at an alternate way of looking at it by what is called Riemann's method of looking at it. By the way, let me also say one thing, not only that advantage of Riemann method over the upper sum and the lower sum method, there is a big advantage. Not only Riemann showed that there exist functions which are discontinuous and integrable by his method, actually he was able to give example of a function, listen carefully, he was able to give example of a function on an interval AB which has infinite number of discontinuities in any subinterval of AB, but still is integrable. A very powerful theory. So that example showed that his method of integration was far more superior to that of integrating continuous functions, just integrating continuous. He was able to give example of a function on actually an interval 0, 1 to 0, 1. That function is from 0, 1 to 0, 1. It has the property that pick up any subinterval of 0, 1, it has infinite number of discontinuities in that subinterval. Not only in 0, 1 it has infinite number of discontinuities, in every subinterval it has infinite number of discontinuities, and still the function is integrable. You are able to say what is the area below the graph of the function. A very nice example. If ever you find mathematics interesting and such things intriguing, and if you have time, then do look at that example later on. For time being, just keep in mind the Riemann way is not just an alternate way of expressing integration, it is a much superior way of expressing integration. And then we proved fundamental theorem of calculus, which says basically that integration, what we have been taught, integration is reverse of differentiation, is justified in that way. Okay. Now we'll look at one example or a powerful application of fundamental theorem of calculus, namely the definition of the natural log function. If you recall, I said that we'll assume there is a function, natural log function, defined in the open interval 0 to infinity for non-negative, right, positive real numbers. Ln of x is defined, it has those property, right? Ln of x, ln of AB is equal to ln of A plus ln of B and all that. It is a differentiable function with derivative 1 over x. Now I want to say how to construct that function. Now look at the power of fundamental theorem of calculus. It says that integral of a function small f, if you know an antiderivative, is going to be equal to fb minus f of a. Supposing I fix the endpoint a and let b be a variable point, then what does the theorem say? It says capital, right, fb minus capital F of a. F of a is fixed, so I can find f of b when b is varying by integrating small f, right, over a to b, and b is a variable point. So it says I can recover a function capital F by integrating its derivative over an interval. Now I want a function log x, right? I know its derivative should be equal to 1 over x. So how do I define log x? It gives me a way of defining log x. So what should be log x? I should integrate the function, its derivative, what I think its derivative is 1 over x, from a fixed point, some fixed point, to a variable point. And that's what we do. And then we verify that this definition is meaningful. It has all the properties that we think of log function. So let us do that. So let us define for any point x in the interval 0 to infinity, ln of x is integral. The point I have fixed is 1. 1 to x, 1 over t dt. So this is the point fix. Go to any point x on the left or on the right. If you are going on the right side, this integral will be a non-negative quantity. If you are on the left side, it will become negative, right? Because the interval will be from x to 1. Okay. So that is the definition. And let me give you your quota of visualization. This is 1 over t or 1 over x. So the value at a point is the area which is shown in white, right? So look at the point 1 to x. Look at how much the area is there below the graph of 1 over x or 1 over t, and that is the value ln of x. Okay? See, as you are going on increasing, the area is increasing because function is a non-negative function. So the function is an increasing function. Ln of x is going to be a increasing function. Okay? At the point 1, the value is going to be 0, right? Because 1 to 1. Integral from 1 to the end point is 1. So value at 1 is 0. It is increasing function, but it doesn't tell you actually that the graph should be of this shape. It is just for visualization, it is drawn that way. It says only increasing function, right? Definition only says it will be a increasing function, right? Because ln of x is integral 1 over t. Why this should be the graph, that we will see from our calculus. So let us prove the various properties. Ln of 1 is 0. It is bigger than 0 for x bigger than 1, less than 0 for less than 1. Its derivative is 1 over x. Ln of xy is equal to sum. The usual properties for any rational, the rational comes out, power comes out. It is a strictly increasing concave downward function 0 to infinity. In particular, it is a 1-1 function. It goes to infinity as all those properties that we know of. So whole of differential calculus is now going to come here, you will see. All of differential calculus comes in proving this theorem. Let us just go through a proof of this. Ln of 1 is 0 is obvious, everybody, because 1 to integral 1 to 1. Limits are 1 to 1. Okay? It is integral of a non-negative function. So ln of x bigger than 0 for x bigger than 1, less than 0, so it is a negative quantity. So that properties are obvious. This proves the first property. 1 over x, x bigger than 0 is a continuous function. You are integrating a continuous function 1 over t, right? So what does fundamental theorem of calculus part 1 say? What will be the derivative? When you integrate, derivative is the integrand, right? So that says that derivative of ln of x is 1 over x by fundamental theorem of calculus. And now the derivative 1 over x, x bigger than 0. So derivative is everywhere bigger than 0. So derivative positive, so it is a monotonically increasing function. Calculus, whole of calculus is going to come, you will see. So we have already seen that derivative bigger than 0 gives you. Okay. Now let us prove the third property, that ln of xy is equal to ln of x plus ln of y. So let us fix a y, and for every x, let us look at the function f of x, which is ln of y into x. And g of x is the function ln of y plus ln of x. What is the derivative of f and what is the derivative of g? What is the derivative of f and what is the derivative of g? Yes? Objective type question. F and g are given. Derivative of ln you know. What is the derivative of this function as a function of x? They are equal. Both have the same derivative. So let me write. Both have the same derivative. So f must be equal to g, except for a constant c. Right? What is c? How do I find the value c? You know the value at one point. You can find the value everywhere else. So what should be c? X is equal to 1 you can put if you like. So that gives you c must be 0. F is equal to, that means ln of yx is equal to ln of y plus ln of x. So we have used that property if two functions differ by derivatives are same, then they differ by a constant. Consequence of Lagrange's mean value theorem. That is also used here. Okay? So that proves this is equal to. Now in this property, getting for negative thing is easy. You can just, take x is equal to y, right? Power n, that power n comes out, right? Ln of 2x is equal to 2 ln x, go on applying again and again, that gives you. And this, if I divide by n, I can divide by n and change x to the power n. What does that give me? X to the power 1 over n is equal to 1 over n of ln of x. The same thing, rewritten gives me this. Okay? And now combine these two. This is for power, this is for a fraction, that gives me for a rational. Okay? So you can combine that two if you like. This plus this is equal to 0. So ln of 1 over x is equal to minus of, that also comes from here. So once you have the basic property, ln of xy is equal to ln of x plus ln of y, everything else is a consequence of, this is algebra, there is not analysis, this is algebra, manipulating the two. And so on. So for a rational and so on, let us skip all those things, because this is all algebra. Derivative is 1 over x. So it's a strictly increasing function has to be 1, 1. Right? If a function is strictly increasing, it has to be 1, 1, obviously. I want to show this function is onto also. It is a function defined in 0 to infinity, taking values, non-negative values. I want to show is taking values in r. I want to say it is a onto function, that every value r is in the real line is taken by ln. It is ln of something. So what should I show? It is an increasing function, right? So I should show it, not only it increases to infinity. That will be showing it is onto. So I want to show it increases to infinity. So this is second derivative minus 1 over x square gives you concave convex thing also coming. Derivative is strictly negative everywhere. So it is concave down function. Okay. Now let us prove it is onto. For that, a small analysis is required now. Now algebra ends. Now analysis, something going to infinity. That is where something is going to infinity, analysis enters into picture. Algebra is over. Right. So ln of 2. What is ln of 2? That is 1 to 2 integral 1 over t dt. That is bigger than 1 by 2, right? Because what is the minimum value of the function? In the interval 1 to 2, half. So it is bigger than the minimum value into the length of the interval. Length is 1, so it is bigger than 1 by 2, right? Now I can raise the power 2 to the power n. What I will get, right? That is n times ln of 2. Ln of 2 is bigger than half, so ln of 2 to the power n is bigger than n by 2. What does it prove? Right? N by 2 is going to infinity, and 2 to the power n can be made as large as you want. So given any point, you can always find a power of n so that 2 to the power n is bigger than that point x. Then what is the value at ln of x? That will be bigger than ln of 2 to the power n, which will be bigger than n by 2. So you can make the value as large as you want by choosing a suitable point, right? And that is what is saying that it goes to infinity. F of x goes to infinity means what? Given any large value, you can find a point x so that f of x is bigger than that value. And that is what we are saying. Given a point x, find n such that 2 to the power n crosses that thing. So n, you will cross n by 2. So that is proof of saying that this goes to infinity as x goes to infinity. And negative thing, because ln of 1 over x is, you can go to the negative side and say it goes to minus infinity as x goes to 0. And that proves whatever I said earlier, that it is onto. It will take every value in between. It is an onto function. Okay. So the graph. So let me stop here by saying this is the graph of the function. Okay. And once you have ln function, you have the exponential function anyway. 1 to 1 onto.